Hello and assalamu alaikum. I am Kashif Kamran and I welcome you to Understanding the 20 Professional Marks in the AAA paper. This is the fourth episode. I've already done 3 episodes on the understanding of the 20 professional marks in the AAA paper. The first episode was the overview of the 20 professional marks and how are they split in the section A and B of the paper. Then in the second episode, I focused on the communication skill. The third episode was focused on analysis and evaluation. And today, the fourth episode of understanding the 20 professional marks in the AAA paper is focused on skepticism and judgment. Now, this is an extremely important skill because, again, this is the core role of an auditor, exercising judgment and be alert. Skepticism is an attribute of an auditor. Being skeptical, having a questioning mind, being alert to situations, and judgment. Because there are lots of areas in the audit process where a judgment is to be exercised by the auditor, particularly the audit manager. And in the AAA paper, you all are audit manager. Now, when you are the audit manager, you need to exercise lots of judgments and you need to be skeptical of the case studies and the situations presented to you in the exam paper by the examiner. Let's see, how would you go about understanding this and the application of this? Because at the end of the day, you need to demonstrate skepticism and judgment to fetch marks. Let's see, how would you do that in your answer? Candidates are expected to demonstrate, because that's the key part, right? Because if you demonstrate, you fetch marks. So you are expected to demonstrate professional skepticism and judgment when assessing the information given in the scenario. Now, that's true because it is a scenario-based paper and you are a manager and the examiner has put a story in front of you and you need to read that story and assess that story with an attitude of a questioning mind and exercising careful judgments or taking careful decisions, like writing careful actions, giving careful recommendations, putting the right safeguards. These are judgments, right? This is key when asked to evaluate the significant risk. Now, we know that in the first question, the question number 1 in section A, examiner asks you evaluate the significant audit risk, or examiner asks you evaluate the significant risk of material misstatement. So when the examiner is asking you evaluate the significant risk, you need to exercise judgment. What exactly are the significant risk in a scenario, or challenging the information which has been provided, or you need to challenge the information. Now, there are 2 careful things if you are noting them down carefully. One is the significant risk, number 1, and number 2 is challenging information. That's number 2. And these together becomes skepticism and judgment. Now, in the first question, examiner will ask you, evaluate the audit risk, significant audit risk, or evaluate the significant risk of material misstatement. And that is where you need to exercise judgment in prioritizing the significant audit risk. And I'll just be telling you how would you go about that. And secondly, whatever information has been presented to you in the case study, you need to challenge that. Not every information will be wrong, but there could be a possibility that particularly the statements coming from the management. We know the management is involved in fraudulent activities. There is a risk of management bias. Whatever the management is telling might not be right. You need to challenge, you need to probe, you need to be skeptical around the information which has been provided to you by the management. So let's understand both of them in further details, evaluation of significant risk and challenging information, because these 2 together make skepticism and judgment demonstration in the AAA paper. Now, first of all, judgment. Now, in terms of judgment, In the first question, primarily, examiner is asking you, evaluate the significant audit risk. The bullet number 1 tells us, prioritizing audit risk or prioritizing the risk of material misstatement, at least the start with 2 to 3 most important risks. Prioritizing is the judgment. And when you're starting to write an answer for audit risk, or when you're starting to write an answer for risk of material misstatement, you should at least start with 2 to 3 most significant risk first. At least. So when you're starting the answer and you start with the insignificant risk first, it is putting a bad impression and you are losing your professional marks for judgment. But if you start writing the answer with 2 to 3 most important risk in the scenario first, and thereafter you write the answer the way you like to write, not in order of priority. Whichever order you want to follow, you can follow the order. That's extremely fine. But at least make a good start by writing 2 to 3 most significant risk first. Now, what exactly are significant risks? How would you identify them? How would you know what are significant risks? Just wait for a few minutes and I'll come to that. The bullet number 2 tells us candidates should be prioritizing the most significant risk first. So you're starting to write the answer with the most important first, at least 2 to 3 of them. And then you can follow whatever order you want to follow. And a brief conclusion justifying their decision. At the end of the briefing note, because you're writing the question number 1 in the format of a briefing note, and I've already guided you about the communication skill in the episode 2 of this understanding the 20 professional marks. So when you're writing a briefing note and you are evaluating the significant risk, in the conclusion of the briefing note, you need to justify your basis that why you considered the risk as significant, the one you wrote first. Suppose you wrote 3 risks first and you thought these are the most significant one. In the conclusion, you need to put a basis of your conclusion or basis of your judgment why you consider them as important. So prioritizing is the judgment, and prioritizing them at the start of your answer is very, very important to put a very good impression on the marker who's checking your paper, rather than you start with insignificant risk first and then come to the significant ones. It is better you start with significant first and then you can follow any order. So that is very, very important. And in the conclusion, justify the basis of your judgment that why you consider the risk as significant. It is important, I'm reading the bullet number 3 now. It is important or essential to place, it is not important. It is not important or essential to place all the risk in order of importance. Now, suppose you're finding 10 risk in an exam and you're writing the answer for 10 risk. You cannot prioritize or order them in their importance from 1 to 10. It's humanly difficult. But at least the first 3 of them can be the most important one, can be the most significant one. And then from number 4 to number 10, you can follow whatever order you want to follow. So it is not important or essential to place all the risk in order of importance. That's humanly impossible in the exam context, and you will be wasting time if you are doing so. But at least start the answer with the most significant one first, as justified in the first bullet. Now, the conclusion of this discussion in the first 3 bullets is what? Prioritizing risk, putting the significant risk first, exercising your judgment by identifying the most significant risk in the case study and putting them first, and then giving a conclusion for your basis. Now, what are significant risks? How would you know what are significant risks? How would you understand from a case study which risks to prioritize first? Now, I've already done a video on that probably 5 months ago, because this terminology significant risk or significant audit risk came in the AAA paper in the last 6 months. And I did a video for students and even covered this in my webinar. Now, for the sake of your guidance, this is the video here. I've put the hyperlink of that video here, which is approximately a 40 minutes video, which tells you about examiner expectations on prioritizing significant risk and what exactly examiner mean when the examiner says significant audit risk. This video is on my YouTube channel. And just to facilitate you, even though the hyperlink has been put here, if I can show you my YouTube channel, which is right in front of your screen now, and you go to my YouTube channel and you go to videos, not home, videos. You go to videos and you leave the first row, you leave the second row, you leave the third row of videos, you leave the fourth one, fifth one, sixth one, and seventh. In the seventh row of the videos, there is a video on the left-hand side which says significant audit risk. So you click on that and you watch it. It will just take you 40 minutes. Keep a pen and paper with you and note down how would you go about prioritizing risk in exam paper. But again, just 3 of them at the start, and then you can follow any order. But that is extremely important to demonstrate the skill of judgment. So please watch this video, significant audit risk, and you will have a clear idea of how would you be going about prioritizing risk in the exam paper. So this is important for judgment. So one, judgment is to be exercised in the question number 1. But we know that judgment is a skill which will also come in the question number 2. Judgment is a skill which will also come in the question number 3. Now, in the rest of the paper, the last bullet is very important. Putting in the best actions. Now, so many times the examiner asks you recommend actions. Recommending the best action, which is in the context of the case. Recommending the best actions, which is in context of the case study. Putting the best actions which suits the situation given to you by the examiner. Either you are putting safeguards for ethical threats, you are putting actions for any issue in the AAA paper, because the recommend actions is a very common terminology we have in the AAA paper, and every student is equipped with that. But putting the best actions, writing the best actions, which is in the context of the case, is the judgment. And recommendations were asked for in the context of the case. So wherever the examiner asks you, provide recommendations, giving the recommendations is also the judgment of the auditor. So you can exercise the judgments by putting the right actions, by putting the right recommendations in the rest of the paper, question number 2 and 3. And even in the question number 1, if the examiner is asking for writing actions or recommendations anywhere in the part B, C, D of the question number 1, you should do that. So what is the bottom line? The bottom line is evaluating the significant risk, prioritizing them, at least the first few of them, and thereafter you can follow any order, providing a conclusion at the end of the briefing note, telling the reason what is the reason of your conclusion that these 3 or these 4 are the most important one. And then in the rest of the paper, including the question number 1, 2, and 3, wherever the examiner asks for writing actions or recommendations, please ensure you're writing the best one in the context of the case study. I even mentioned in my previous episodes, case sync, or linking the answer with the case, absorbing the case will not just fetch you the judgment marks, it will fetch you professional skill marks in totality. Because if you are writing an answer which is linked to the case study, you're fetching most of your professional skill marks. So that's extremely important. Now, moving on and looking at skepticism in the exam context. Now, we know auditor needs to be skeptical, and you are a manager in the AAA paper. Every question starts in the AAA paper. You are a manager, and something has been delegated to you. Now, in terms of skepticism, challenge or question the calculations or assumptions given in the case scenario. We know that when we are reading the case, there are so many calculations which are given in the case study. And again, we know these calculations are performed by the management, or the assumptions which are given by the management, the assumptions undertaken by the management. So wherever you find a calculation or an assumption or a statement of the management, and the management is claiming something, or the management is trying to tell you something, you need to be skeptical. You need to understand whether the statement is right or wrong. Not necessarily everything is wrong. Just get this out of your mind. But yes, if the management is telling you about a certain accounting treatment, be skeptical, be realistic to ensure that whether the treatment which the management is telling me is right in accordance with the international financial reporting standards or not. There is a possibility it might be wrong, and there is a possibility it might be right. So you need to be skeptical. Wherever you see an assumption, wherever you see a judgment of the management, wherever you see a calculation of the management, be skeptical. There is a possibility that something might be wrong in that calculation or assumption, and you need to be skeptical picking that out. The bullet number 2 just further elaborates on the first bullet. Don't simply accept everything at the face value. You are an auditor, right? Whatever management tells you and you accept it on the face value, that is not an auditor. You are not an auditor. Whatever management is telling you, whether it is a statement, it is a claim of the management, it is a calculation of a management, it is an assumption of a management, you are not accepting it on the face value. You will probe it, you will investigate it, you will question it, you will challenge it to conclude whether it is right or wrong. So don't simply accept everything at face value. And also, not necessarily everything is wrong. The third bullet, there is a risk of management bias, and we know that risk of management bias exists across the 3 questions of the AAA paper, because management might be doing something wrong to window dress a financial statement. Management might be concealing something from the shareholder. Management might be concealing something from the lenders. Management might be concealing something for overstating the profits. And that's what the management do in the whole AAA paper. That's the central idea of the AAA paper. Now, there is a risk of management bias. Investigate management statements carefully. Investigate management statements carefully. Example, such as in the basis of provisions or the basis of amortization of the purchased intangible asset. If the management is taking a basis of a provision, be realistic whether the bases are right or wrong. If the management is taking a basis for the useful life, be clear whether the useful life is right or wrong. If the management is taking a basis for amortization, whether the bases are right or wrong. If the management is saying there is no need for amortization, is the management right or wrong? If the management is taking a stance about whether the intangible asset has a finite life or an infinite life, be sure, is the management right or wrong on this stance? Lastly, in review of the audit evidence, we know that question comes very common in the AAA paper when you are a manager and you have to review the working papers. This question is set at the completion stage of the audit, and mostly you find it in the question 2 or 3. In review of the audit work or evidence obtained during audit, how many times examiner asks you, evaluate the sufficiency and appropriateness of evidence? And the evidence is already gathered by the team. And you are a manager and you are looking at whether the evidence gathered by the team is sufficient and appropriate. So you need to be skeptical to conclude whether it is sufficient or insufficient, or whether it is appropriate or inappropriate. So in a review of the evidence obtained during audit, be skeptical to challenge why the opinion gathered by the audit team is insufficient, or why the evidence, gathered by the audit team is insufficient or inappropriate. So the evidence by the audit team will be given in the case study, and you need to conclude as an auditor, as a manager, that whether the evidence gathered by the audit team is insufficient or inappropriate, or is it appropriate and is it sufficient. So a question on evidence will also test your skepticism skill. Generally, a question on risk where you are uh, investigating management statements, where you are investigating the risk of management bias, or in any other question in the AAA paper where you are investigating the management statements, the management claims, the management assumptions, the management calculations. That is extremely important to exercise skepticism. So don't take everything at face value, but on the other way around, not necessarily everything is wrong. So you need to be skeptical about calculations, assumptions, management claims, management statements, management basis, and you need to review the working papers. You need to review the evidence gathered by the audit team very skeptically, because there might be something insufficient and inappropriate in the evidence gathered by the auditor. In the last bullet, the word opinion was wrong. It should be replaced by the word evidence. So the evidence gathered by the audit team is insufficient or inappropriate. I hope this fourth episode will help you demonstrate skepticism and judgment when you're writing the answer. So when we write an answer, we need to ensure that in the writing up of the answer, we are demonstrating the skills, we are challenging the assumptions, we are challenging the calculations, we are concluding whether the evidence is insufficient and appropriate, and more importantly, we are prioritizing the risk as guided to you, and putting the best actions and best recommendations in context. Please do watch my video on significant risk, because that will really help you exercise the skill of judgment in a more better manner in exam paper. So this is the fourth episode of understanding the 20 professional skill marks in the AAA paper, Skepticism and Judgment. I'm signing off from this fourth episode and will be back with the fifth one, the final one, which will be on commercial acumen, the fifth, another very important skill. Take good care of yourself and wish you the very best of luck for your upcoming exams. This is your tutor, Kashif Kamran, signing off from episode 4 of Understanding 20 Professional Marks in AAA paper. Goodbye. Allah Hafiz.